Greetings to everyone in the venue and to everyone watching the live broadcast. Thank you for coming to today's event. Now we will open the Japan Committee for the ICRF Tokyo Conference, the Crisis of Religious Freedom and Democracy in Japan. Today's event is being broadcast live to the whole world via YouTube. Since its establishment in 1998, the Japan Committee for the International Coalition for Religious Freedom, ICRF, has been working to raise awareness for the importance of religious freedom among the Japanese public and to protect people from religious prejudice and oppression both in Japan and overseas. Today, we are delighted to welcome back Mr. Marco Respinti, who gave an encouraging address at the General Assembly on July 22nd for a four-city lecture tour here in Japan. We are also honored to have Mr. Tomihiro Tanaka, President of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification in Japan, join us to share his honest thoughts. Please stay with us until the very end. On behalf of the organizers, now we would like to invite Vice President Pema Gyalpo to deliver his greeting. Hello, everyone. I am truly grateful that so many people have gathered here today. And originally, Chairman Ito was planned to come, but I would like to give greetings on his behalf for about 5 minutes. When we think about religious freedom, I believe you might think of the many Buddhist era, Jesus era, the era of Muhammad. In those times as well, there were many persecutions and sometimes even maybe assassinations. And in the end, they were put on the crosses or maybe tried to be killed through poison. So protecting freedom of religion is actually not easy. And furthermore, by communists who want to completely deny freedom of religion, many people were killed. As you may know, in Tibet and Mongol, many monks have been killed, and also in Cambodia, many monks have been assassinated. So throughout history, protecting freedom of religion has been very difficult. But after the Second World War, through the UN and through world organizations, the freedom of religion has been seen and protected as very important, and many movements have been activated to protect this right. Freedom of religion is something personal, and it's not something that anybody can force onto you. And also, of course, there is the freedom not to believe. But now, and right now we think all countries of the world have a duty to protect freedom of religion as a universal right, human right. Separation of church and state does not mean that it means that the government does not try to destroy or protect a particular religion. It means that it protects its people's rights of religion. And from this point, in Japan as well, this Japan Committee is really working hard to protect this freedom of religion. Today, after this, the spiritual advisor of Donald Trump will give us a video message, and also we will have two speakers giving us keynote addresses. And in we have many honorable guests. And many religious leaders today here with us. So we all have a common purpose, a common goal, and I think it is very important that we really take interest in each other. This problem is not only a problem of Japan. Mother Teresa said that it is very sad that Japanese people are indifferent to the world and to themselves. So I think that through these kind of events, we can have more interest in many things. And finally, Gandhi said that if we fear criticism, we cannot do anything. If you're going to fear criticism, don't do anything. So we must, as religious people, as religious leaders, we must respect other people's rights, but also we have to keep and protect our own rights, and we must not fear and move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice President Pema Gyalpo, for your inspiring message to guide today's event. We will now move on to the keynote address. First, we are honored to welcome Mr. Marco Respinti, who is a member of the International Federation of Journalists, as well as the director of Bitter Winter, an online magazine dedicated to religious freedom and human rights. This lecture will be delivered in English. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Marco Respinti with a round of applause. Mr. Respinti, the floor is yours.
Ladies, gentlemen, konnichiwa. Let me immediately express my deep sympathy and admiration for Japan, its history, and its culture. I also admire Japan as a vibrant democracy. It is a country that has suffered much, including unprecedented and unique horrors from which other nations have been, thanks to God, spared. I just visited Hiroshima, and you know what I mean. I am a foreign citizen and cannot speak your language, your beautiful language, and I'm a guest, and of course I have no title to judge Japan, nor is it my intention to do it. But one thing I know for sure, and this is universal, a pivotal element of a healthy society and the distinct character of a true democracy is freedom of religion, belief, or creed for everyone. International treaties call it FORB, F-O-R-B, freedom of religion or belief. This is actually important. Practices that are not technically religion are still manifestation of belief and are thus protected by FORB. I want to push this statement even further. FORB for everyone is the first political human rights immediately following the right to life of all human beings. Human beings are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Life is the first, because without it, there are no human beings. The second is the right to freely address the most important question of life. It is the question regarding the existence or non-existence of God, a supreme being, an ordinating principle, an ultimate cosmic force, or whatever name you may give it to it. If and when human beings are free to address that decisive and final question, they are indeed, truly and ultimately free. Religious liberty is not only the freedom of believing or non-believing, but that of living one's life according to one's belief or non-belief. Belief and non-belief directly concern the organization of life. Not only in the private sphere, where no one can really curtail that right, but in the public sphere as well. This is why I define FORB for everyone, not only as the fundamental right of human beings, but also as the first political right. It deals, in fact, with the polis, the ancient Greek term meaning the public sphere, from which the word politics the rights. Furthermore, from FORB come all other human rights. In fact, even when human beings are left free to address that ultimate, decisive, intimate as well as public question, they can live their life accordingly and enjoy all its implications in terms of liberties and rights. Freedom of expression, association, and education are important, intimate, and public rights, but in an ideal list of hierarchy, they come after FORB, and it can even be argued that they derive from it. FORB should then concern every human being, every protagonist of a healthy society, and every true builder of democracy. Directly or indirectly, FORB is always at stake everywhere. It has been so throughout human history, directly or indirectly. Societies and empires, nations and political communities have been built or destroyed, came and went in time because of direct or indirect implication of FORB. Let me repeat it clearly. FORB should always concern every human being, not at the individual level only, but for society as a whole and for all humanity. Even when even one single human being does not fully enjoy FORB, then all human beings suffer the consequences of this loss. This demonstrates that the question of religious liberty is the most serious question of them all. Scholars have identified FORB as the most threatened human right in the world today. FORB is threatened and persecuted in too many different countries, where social cohesion, peace, and harmony are undermined by hatred, ideology, and lust for power. We call those countries non-democratic regimes. We understand democracy, whatever institutional form a country's political community may have, not as yet another regime, but as the good exercise of power by the authorities who aim at the common good and the participation of the people of the life of the polis. Unfortunately, though, even democratic countries may and do suffer the diminishment of the right of their citizens to FORB. Persecution may manifest themselves directly or indirectly. For example, at the fiscal, administrative, organizational, and cultural levels. Those democracies that curtail or deny FORB are then incomplete democracies. They need substantial reform. We understand that also in Japan, FORB is today diminished or threatened. Bitter Winter, the online daily magazine specializing in religious liberty that I had the honor to serve as director in charge, a capacity that brings me in this country as a concerned observer to learn and discuss the topic, has covered the difficulties of FORB in Japan in the last few years. They greatly increased after the assassination of Abe Shinzo in the city of Kashihara, Nara Prefecture, Japan, on July the 8th, 2022. New, not well-known, or small religious groups are often also referred to as cults. Social agitators, part of the so-called anti-cult movement, insist their campaign are against cults only. But the fact is that this is not always true. Sentiment against religion in general may well be addressing, may begin addressing cults, but it is soon the hatred, it is soon generalized, and this because cult itself is a problematic concept. It is not a scientific word, and most scholars refrain from using it. Indefinite and in its meaning and borders, it complicates things rather than simplifying them. What does it distinguish, in fact, a cult from a legitimate religion? Who draws the line, and based on which criteria? Can a set of law, a code, or a secular state enter into the complex and sometimes complicated theologies, liturgies, histories of groups whose mentality they barely understand? The use of the word cult is in fact always derogatory and serves to label rivals or people that an individual or an organization or an institution or a state dislike. It indicates always the other and is cast on people and groups without any proof. In sum, a cult results always to be what the person, organization, institution, state, using that word against a religious or spiritual group, make that world mean. Also, cults are accused of brainwashing to control their victims, but also this notion has been widely rejected as pseudoscientific by the vast majority of scholars who study new religions movements in the West, and by courts of law in the US and other countries. Yet this does not seem to be generally known in Japan, as not very well known is also the opposition by a large part of the scholarly community to the anti-cult narrative prevailing in the media. In fact, in Japan, there is no parallel to that reaction, as most scholars of religion are afraid to jeopardize their careers by being associated with cults, as it happened to some of them who had naively supported Aum Shinrikyo. It is also important to note that the anti-cult movement in Japan was not born in a vacuum. For historical reasons I have no time to elaborate on here, since the French Revolution, French governments have been suspicious of religion in general and religious minorities they see as difficult to control in particular. There are government agencies in France whose mandate is to fight cults and even to promote the anti-cult ideology internationally. Bitter Winter has documented that these agencies and Japanese lawyers hostile to cults started meeting since the last decades of the past century. We have also documented in Bitter Winter by publishing inter alia the excellent works by Japanese investigative journalist Fukuda Masumi, that these lawyers were not only motivated by greed and by the perspective of easy money to be made by suing cults. Most of them were socialists and communists, and they wanted to target one specific new religion that had been successful in Japan with its anti-communist campaigns, the Family Federation, then called the Unification Church. After more than 2 years from the murder of former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, many shadows remain on that case. But the key element here is that, as a result, while the assassin still remains with no trial and sentence, the Family Federation, or FF, has been overloaded with accusation as if it were the perpetrator rather than the victim. The FF is being punished, not the criminal. Abe paid a high price. The FF is paying a high price, but the villain was solely the assassin. No one else but him should be made accountable for that heinous crime. Yet, as I said, the contrary is happening. Yamagami, the assassin, the killer of Abe, is, as some Western scholars have suggested, committed one of the most successful political assassinations in whole history. His stated aim was to create trouble for and possibly destroy the Family Federation. While many political assassinations backfire and the criminals do not achieve their aims, so far Yamagami is being remarkably successful. Of course, he is successful because he clouds his crime with several lies. I am, of course, not the prosecutor of Yamagami, not intend to be. I do not want to anticipate any court of law of this honorable country. I just try to do my work as an observer and a reporter. I just use the word lies because Yamagami's claim on the supposed guilt of the FF is evidently false, a fact that can be demonstrated in many ways. For the sake of the argument today, and above all for the sake of truth, I want to indulge for a moment now in the mental mechanisms that brought the assassin to his wrong conclusion. As said, the assassin committed this criminal act having decided that the Unification Church and even politicians who showed some sympathy to it needed to be punished because the church's doctrines and teachings led his mother to a specific behavior he condemns. Basically, the assassin thinks that the Unification Church / family federation is an evil cult. It is certainly true that for the international anti-cult movement that defined that word, the Unification Church was the quintessential and even stereotypical cult. But definition of cults we may find in dictionaries do not apply to the FF. But this is, while interesting, politically irrelevant, since the anti-cult movement has hijacked the world, including in Japan, and had imposed its own definition and its own list of cults to the media. In the West, the academia, courts of law, and at least some quality media have abandoned this derogatory and discriminatory terminology. This does not seem to be the case in Japan. On December the 13th, 2022, radically modifying the previous case law in the decision Tokay and others versus Bulgaria, the European Court of Human Rights stated that governments, national and local, cannot use the word cult, I underline this, cannot use the word cult, and parallel expression in other languages to stigmatize religious minorities in official documents and campaigns, since this is inherently discriminatory and may even generate violence. Again, as far as I know, this decision that created great international interest has rarely been discussed or even mentioned in Japan. In this country, it seems that the authorities continue on the dangerous path of stigmatizing religious minorities by calling them cults or antisocial organizations. I have the strong impression that a major injustice is being perpetrated here. The victim was made the perpetrator and is now called to pay the price for the deeds of others. Yamagami's criminal act produced grave consequences, the end of which is not yet in sight. In fact, his statement of accusation against the FF ignited a series of events that led the government's request to dissolve the church as a religious corporation on October the 13th, 2023. In Japan, this solution requires a court case, as you perfectly know, which is currently pending. In parallel, as both a cause and an effect, the anti-cult lawyers revamped all the old campaign against the FF, and while they were at it, targeted other conservative religions, in particular the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, why should the FF be dissolved? What crime did it commit? Did the FF kill former Prime Minister Abe? Of course not. Through, quote, a mixture of truths referring to events that occurred decades ago, half-truths and outright lies, and occurred as 12 NGOs representing the who's who of religious liberty advocacy throughout the world protested the Japanese government's action in October 2023. The FF is now being described as an antisocial organization that needs to be dissolved for the sake of public good. But the case is all constructed on false premises and even more false conclusion, bringing the aforementioned NGOs to describe the call for dissolution of FF, quote again, a measure reminiscent of the practices current in China and Russia rather than in democratic countries, end of quote. It is in fact, quote, out of proportion with the charges raised against it and not consistent with the Families Federation law-abiding behavior. It will also open the way to similar action against other religious minorities unpopular with certain lawyers or political groups and the media, end of quote. Scholars have already contributed much to clarify this blatant case of injustice. Patricia Duval is an attorney and a member of the Paris Bar, and if I may, also a friend with whom the speaker had the opportunity to conduct journalistic on my side and legal on her side, investigation on serious violation of religious liberty, even resulting in murderers. She has a degree in public law from the Sorbonne University in Paris, France, and specializes in international human rights law. She has defended the rights of minorities of religion or belief in domestic and international fora, and before international institutions, such as the European Court of Human Rights, the Council of Europe, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, the European Union, and the United Nations. On September the 25th, 2024, she presented to various United Nations personalities and institutions a report on the case of the FF in Japan, which became commonly known as the Duval Report. It is the most complete and detailed analysis of the case to date, and Bitterwinter had the privilege to publish it. The Duval Report is intended for politicians and general public. Duval soon followed up with another important document in which she presents a more technical legal analysis of the case. Bitterwinter had the privilege to publish that text as well. I urge all to read and study Duval's publication for a sounder and more precise legal understanding of the whole matter. Duval recalls that in the past, members of the FF, quote, had been subjected to abduction and coercion to recount their faith, called deprogramming, a situation that urged the Church to send a detailed report to various United Nations human rights bodies to expose the outrageous violation they had suffered of their most basic right, end of quote. After recommendation from the UN Human Rights Committee to Japan to put an end to this practice, and a 2014 ruling by the High Court of Tokyo, confirmed by the Supreme Court in the following year, 2015, the obnoxious phenomenon disappeared, although much later than it did in other democratic countries, with the unfortunate exception of South Korea. However, a byproduct of the past deprogramming is that FF members who had been deprogrammed were asked by anti-cult lawyers to sue the FF for damages. Indeed, if they refused to sue, they were declared as still not totally deprogrammed and confined again. This created an avalanche of civil tort cases against the FF. Basically, the civil cases all rest on the discredited theory of brainwashing. When plaintiffs, coached by the anti-cult lawyers, report that they were compelled to join the FF or to donate, they do not mean they were coerced to do so by violence or at a gunpoint. They admit they joined and donate spontaneously, and at that time they were persuaded they were doing this for highly moral and spiritual reasons. Only after having been deprogrammed and having been socialized into the anti-cult ideology by the lawyers hostile to the FF, they retrospectively understood that their choices were not really free, but resulted from brainwashing. In the United States and at the European Court of Human Rights, judges have concluded since the past century that brainwashing is not an accepted scientific concept and cannot be used in courts of law. In what has been hailed as a definitive summary on the subject, published in 2022 by Cambridge University Press, one of the most prestigious university presses of the world, my colleague and friend, Massimo Introvigne, has concluded that the idea that cults use brainwashing has been debunked so many times by academicians and courts of law that it is today no more respectable than the theory that the earth is flat. Yet France, and it seems now also Japan, are defying international academic ridicule by using it as a basis for laws, regulation, and legal action. A second point regards proselytism. It seems there is a misunderstanding prevailing in Japan about the content of FORB and the obligations Japan has really assumed and should respect after signing and ratifying international treaties protecting FORB. It is sometimes claimed in Japan that the action against the FF do not threaten FORB, since FF believers, even if the religious corporation is dissolved, will maintain that freedom to believe that they want, the freedom of belief to believe that they want in their private homes and activities. This is a false idea of freedom of religion, often advocated by totalitarian regimes, such as China, again, and Russia, as it suits their own purposes. FORB, as defined by international treaties, is a social as well as an individual right. It includes the right to publicly worship, to own properties, to solicit donations, and to engage in proselytizing activities. Japan claims that in the case of IFF and other groups, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, proselytizing is antisocial because it is based on brainwashing again, and on manipulating the fears of prospective converts. As Patricia Duval has demonstrated, not only this limitation of proselytizing rights are incompatible with international law, they may easily apply to all religions. For example, Jews and Christians find in Psalm 111 a sentence that the Latin translation of the Bible known as Vulgata, rendered as initial sapientia's timor domini. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Ideally, we should perform good deeds for the love of God, but the author of the Psalms, knowing human nature, understood that many, at least initially, refrain from committing evil and do good for the fear of God. This is normal and even the beginning of wisdom, although the beginning only. A third point concerns donation. In 2022 and 2023, laws and administrative regulations have been enacted in Japan, limiting the possibility for religious organization that threatens public welfare and do not enjoy social acceptability to solicit donation. They also make it extremely easy for those who have donated and left the group and for the relative of those who are still in the movement to claim their donation. Massimo Introvigne, a little bit satirically, but in fact catching the substance of the regulation, has summarized them by stating that under the new Japanese law, if you felt confused when you donated, this proves you were under brainwashing. If you did not feel confused, this proves brainwashing was highly effective. If you still believe today that you donated if you still believe today that you donated freely, this proves you are still under brainwashing, and your relatives may act to claim back the donation on your behalf. All rests on brainwashing again and single out certain minority religions as threatening public welfare and not being socially acceptable. Since there are no clear criteria defining these notions, what religions should be blacklisted in this way is decided arbitrarily by the government or by the anti-cult lawyers advising it. A fourth point concerns second-generation members who are raised by parents belonging to FF and other groups deemed to be socially acceptable. After the Abe assassination, Japan invented a category of religious child abuse, claiming that children raised in a conservative or cultic religion are abused and neglected in many different ways. This new category inspired guidelines published in 2022 in the form of question and answers. They are so broad that they threaten form of many religions, not only FF. Among behaviors considered as religious child abuse, there is, of course, socializing children into religion that are not socially acceptable, and this targets the FF. But also prohibited is preventing children from celebrating birthdays, which is typical of Jehovah's Witnesses, sending minors over 18 to confession if there is a risk that in confession the minor will confess sins connected to sex, which targets the Catholic Church, and counseling daughters minor of 18 not to have an abortion even in cases where Japanese law allows it for minors, targeting again Catholics who oppose abortion in all cases, as well as conservative evangelicals. The guidelines have been ridiculed internationally when they regard as religious child abuse, even preventing children from reading comics or watching cartoons their schoolmates regularly access based on religious or moral objections in a country that has been repeatedly sanctioned by UNICEF for allowing children to access manga and anime with violent and sexually explicit explicit content. These guidelines may be laughed at, but they are used to argue that the FF, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and even conservative Christians in general abuse and damage their children, and may have to be subjected to limitation in their educational practices. I jump to my conclusion. For this and other reason that I cannot peruse in detail today, the request for dissolving the FF in Japan is a blatant and unjustified act of aggression on FORB in this country. If FORB is, as it is demonstrably is, the first political human right and the chief characteristic of a true democracy, the governmental request for dissolving the FF in Japan is a serious curtail of human rights and a blow to democracy. It is the dissolution of liberty. This request is accompanied, as I have mentioned, by a cluster of new laws and regulations targeting several religions and severely limiting FORB in Japan. Again, I am both a foreign national and an enthusiastic friend of Japan. I have no intention to interfere with its law and politics, and not a single word I uttered today or before or later should be constructed as an attempt to go beyond my status of an observer and a reporter on religious liberty in the world. But Japanese authorities owe Japanese people truth at all costs. They need to study and follow the expertise of international scholars paying attention to the remarks put forth by experts. Japan deserves it. The Japanese citizens deserve it. Defending the right of FORB of the Japanese people is a duty of the Japanese government and the mark of its true democratic nature. The violation of FORB for members of the FF and other religion is injustice done to the member of these groups, to all Japanese of every religious persuasion, including non-believers, and to the entire world. The case against religion, not only against the FF, is in fact spreading in the country, and Bitter Winter, as it is its duty, has constantly reported this alarming situation be the targets the Jehovah's Witnesses or evangelicals or others. I conclude with the words of an urgent statement that Bitter Winter published on October 13, 2023, gloomily still valid. It was an appeal against yet another dangerous proposal allowing the government to freeze the assets of religious organizations it seeks to dissolve, but its words apply to the FORB crisis in Japan in general. It contains a reference to a poem that summarizes well the sentiment that all religions should maintain towards one another. We at Bitter Winter use it in public quite often. Remaining silent, quote, remaining silent hoping to be spared by campaigns whose final aim is to impose severe limitation affecting all religions would place them, the religions, in the position of an average timid German clergyman during the Nazi years, captured in the famous poem by Lutheran pastor and dissident Martin Niemöller. Now the poem. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. May God forbid that such a day comes for Japan. Dear ladies, honorable gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention. Arigato.
Thank you, Mr. Marco Respinti, for your insightful and invaluable message. Let us give another big round of applause to our speaker. Thank you very much. Now we have a special message prepared for this event, sent all the way from the United States. Let us take a moment to watch this video message. Pastor Paula White served as the spiritual advisor to President Donald Trump and worked tirelessly to ensure that the voices of people of faith reached the government. Pastor White, along with other Christian pastors, offered prayers for Trump's victory during this year's election campaign and has continued to meet frequently with President-elect Trump after his election. She has prayed that the God who miraculously spared Trump's life during a shooting incident that occurred during the campaign will enable him to fulfill his mission as the newly elected president. The following video you will see is a message we have received from Pastor Paula White addressed to this Freedom of Religion conference organized by the Japan Committee for ICRF.
Dear distinguished leaders, I am Pastor Paula White, President of the National Faith Advisory Board in the United States and Spiritual Advisor to President-elect Donald J. Trump. I'm honored to speak to you today at the International Coalition for Religious Freedom. I want to greet all the leaders and citizens of Japan and thank you for your strong support for the United States-Japan Alliance for Peace. Japan and the United States are very close and most critical allies to ensure peace in Asia and around the world. As you know, President Donald J. Trump was elected to a second term on November 5, 2024. He is the strongest advocate of religious freedom and will increase his unwavering support for religious freedom for all faiths and all people. President Trump was very close with Prime Minister Abe, who was the most courageous leader who strongly led Japan against tyranny in the world. We mourn his loss. Religious freedom is the foundation for all other freedoms. Japan is the United States' great ally, who we have the greatest appreciation for. However, concern has now been raised by prominent leaders around the world that believe Japan is not upholding its religious freedom commitment as a signer of the UN Human Rights Declaration. The United States State Department Office of International Religious Freedom, in its 2022 and 23 reports, showed serious questions that Japan, as a prominent world leader and great liberal democracy, is now violating religious freedom. Ambassador Rashad Hussain, the current U.S. State Department's ambassador at large in the Office of International Religious Freedom, noted concern about Japan in the Japan section of his 22 and 23 report. The report in 2022 stated that CAP-LC, a Paris-based United Nations NGO, submitted a series of statements to the UN Human Rights Committee that said that the Unification Church in Japan had become a victim of a campaign of intolerance, discrimination, and persecution in Japan since Prime Minister Abe's assassination. The church stated its members suffered attacks, assaults, and death threats as a result of negative media attention. The 2023 report stated that Japan deviated from the norm when it decided to dissolve the Unification Church without any criminal law being broken by the church. This year, on April 30th, 24, the United Nations issued a UN mandate through its rapporteurs on religious freedom and human rights, calling into question Japan's compliance with the UN Human Rights Declaration and the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, to which Japan is a signer. According to the UN mandate, government guidelines stating that parents who strongly urge their children to go to church could be seen as child abuse. The mandate says this is directly causing the violations and physical attacks to the members of the Jehovah's Witnesses and persecution of the Family Federation and other religions. The UN Rapporteur on Religious Freedom made a formal request to the Japanese government to visit Japan to investigate the possible violations of religious freedom against minority religions, but the nation of Japan has denied her request. This rejection of her request is listed on the United Nations website. This is raising serious concern throughout the world about religious freedom in Japan. We in the United States are concerned that the media and some in the government and the Ministry of Justice are suppressing information and not allowing the public to know about the facts. Letters were sent to Prime Minister Kishida, the foreign minister, and the court from current U.S. congressmen, former heads of state, and the former U.S. Secretary of State, as well as the former U.S. Speaker of the House. The former U.S. Secretary of State said that this could have severe implications for our vital partnership and global perception of Japan's commitment to human rights. Religious freedom scholars and experts around the world are calling on Japan to stop the violation of the Jehovah's Witness and the Family Federation, Unification Church. As faith leaders and religious freedom experts, we urge our great ally in Japan to uphold religious freedom for all. May God abundantly bless Japan and the United States, Japan Alliance for Freedom throughout the world. Be blessed.
That was a powerful and encouraging message from the United States. Thank you very much. Next, we would like to invite Mr. Tomihiro Tanaka, Japanese President of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, to the stage. President Tanaka, the floor is yours. Thank you for the introduction. I am Tomihiro Tanaka, the President of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification in Japan. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for having been invited to this very important event. And also, Chairman Pema Gyalpo, it's nice to see you. And also, Mr. Marco Respinti, I am truly happy to be able to see you here. And thank you for your encouraging words and words of courage. And also, we also received a message from Pastor Paula White, who was the spiritual advisor to President Trump. I am truly grateful for that message too. I believe the reason that I have been invited here is to speak on behalf of our organization in response to the recent media coverage on the issue of freedom of religion and human rights, which was triggered by the abnormal media reports following the shooting of former Prime Minister Abe and has led to the current situation where the government has demanded our dissolution. First of all, I would like to offer my sincere apologies for the fact that over the past 2.5 years, the media coverage of our organization has caused a stir in the Diet and in the general public, and has also contributed to a sense of social distrust of religious groups among many citizens. I'm also deeply sorry for the anxiety and worry that this has caused to our followers. Today, many religious leaders are present, and I sincerely regret that we must address the theme of religious freedom under such circumstances. After the incident with former Prime Minister Abe, we were perplexed by the sudden storm of critical media reports. But we also reflected on many of our previous church activities and actively worked on church reform while facing various opinions and suggestions from everyone. Since obtaining religious corporation status in 1964, the Family Federation has spent 60 years upholding the teachings of our founder and the values of living with God and living for the sake of others. We have nurtured many passionate young leaders devoted to saving the world. We have also strived to contribute to building a world of peace through our global network. However, it is also true that we have always faced opposing forces to these ideals. One such force is the atheistic and communist ideologies that reject the notion that the foundation of peace is the family, and the foundation of a nation is the family, and that fundamentally deny the belief in eternal life. We have been subjected to attacks by many left-wing lawyers, journalists, and the Communist Party. Moreover, the fact that our founder was Korean has undeniably contributed to the distortion of the media coverage against us. Since the shooting incident, while the trial of the murder of former Prime Minister Abe has yet to be held, aggressive reporting on the Family Federation, also referred to as the Reo witch hunt, has swept across all media. Distrust of traditional media, such as television and newspapers, had already been growing in recent years. And the reporting on our organization has also been extremely biased. Opposing forces that have been plotting to dissolve our organization for decades have positioned this incident as the perfect opportunity, misleading public opinion with distorted information, and involving politicians ultimately pushing for a dissolution order. It is very unfortunate, but even now, the voices of our members do not reach the government, the media, or the public. Our hopes for a fair and impartial reporting have been betrayed, and the true voices have been completely silenced. For our members, their existence has been denied, and having faith itself has become a risk to their lives. Since the incident, the damage caused to the organization by media reports has been immense. While I would prefer to avoid discussing the details here, some of our church staff have been severely affected, suffering from mental health issues, including depression. In the end, political motivations led to the request for a dissolution order. But frankly speaking, we still have several doubts. Let me share some of them with you. First, I would like to address the issue of fabricated victims, namely the problem of forced apostasy through abduction and confinement. Among those who are referred to as victims in past civil cases, which the government has used as grounds for requesting dissolution, many were individuals who left our organization after being abducted, confined, and coerced into abandoning their faith. Christian pastors opposing the Family Federation, deprogrammers motivated by financial gain, and opposing lawyers have formed a network manipulating parents and relatives to abduct and confine individuals, trapping them in environments when they are forced to renounce their beliefs. Once confined, often this continues for months or even years. Despite repeated complaints to the police about these extreme criminal acts, they took no action whatsoever. The United Nations Human Rights Committee issued recommendations to the Japanese government regarding abductions and forced confinement, but to this day, the Japanese government has continued to ignore them. All cases of forced apostasy have been dismissed as family issues. Doors were locked with multiple locks. Iron bars were installed on windows, and contact with the outside world was completely cut off. On top of that, several family members constantly stayed with and monitored that individual. How is this a family issue? Can such a situation be called a family discussion? Opposing lawyers have shamelessly called it protection by the family. To conceal the abduction, they use the term protection. And the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology even introduced the term monitoring to further conceal the fact that these are fabricated victims. This move by the government to rely solely on the testimonies of these defectors misleads the public and undermines democracy, which is based on rule of law. One European religious scholar criticized this, saying, "A parade of ex-members who became apostates has begun." Fortunately, about 30% of the abducted members have returned safely. Why do they not listen to their experiences? Next, I would like to address the declaration of severing relations made by the president of the Liberation Democratic Party, the current ruling party. He described the Family Federation as a group with social issues and declared the severing of relations. The president of the LDP is also the Prime Minister of Japan. Due to this statement by then Prime Minister Kishida, the Family Federation was branded as an anti-social organization. Some local governments used this declaration as a justification to pass resolutions to sever relations. And much of the damage inflicted on our organization stems from this declaration. However, we have not heard even once from the president himself that what the problem with the Unification Church is. According to the Religious Corporations Act, exercising the right to question shall not be interpreted as being authorized for the purpose of a criminal investigation. The requirements for dissolution could not be found, and the exercise of right to question became an attempt to find the basis for the dissolution order. We argue that this is a violation of the Religious Corporations Act. Third is the effectiveness of the LPD's severing relations. How exactly will this be promoted? Does this mean that all the religious beliefs of each and every supporter will be checked? How will they sever relations, going beyond freedom of thought and belief? If a member of the Family Federation supports an LPD member in the next election, how will their thought and belief be checked? Fourth, why is the Consumer Affairs Agency handling the issue of donations to religious corporations? Donation practices are purely religious acts. Shouldn't recommendations regarding legal activities in this regard come from the appropriate authority, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology? Does this mean the government does not view donations as a religious act and instead regards them as consumer transactions, just like a sale of goods? The Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology has condemned our organization as a social harm, claiming that the legal status of the religious corporation has functioned as a vehicle for illegal activities or the acquisition of property through deviant practices. In simpler terms, they are labeling the Family Federation as a money-making criminal organization disguised as a religious corporation. Over 100,000 active members are living according to our teachings, practicing a life of living for the sake of others, as Japanese citizens who love the world. They lead happy lives. Second-generation members who have chosen their faith for themselves are also proudly sharing the joy of their belief. Even when so, is the Family Federation still to be judged as not being a religion? By the way, according to the data released by the Consumer Affairs Agency under the newly enacted Unfair Donation Solicitation Prevention Law, I would like to note that, as for now, there have been 0 cases requiring recommendation for our organization under this law. Number 5, I believe the government should be fair and impartial. While the government has listened to the voices of former members who have lost their faith and left the church, why has it closed its ears to the voices of the current members? From our perspective, the dissolution order is equivalent to a death sentence. It would result in the erasure of our social identity. Despite the gravity of such a matter, the government reached the worst possible decision without even hearing from the people directly involved. We requested to submit 53,000 handwritten petitions from members across the country, but the government refused to accept them directly. As a result, we had no choice but to send them by mail. In contrast, when the government accepted petitions from former members and groups advocating for the dissolution of our organization, they invited the media and even publicly released photographs. This is clearly an unfair response by the government. In fact, this kind of treatment has been the norm in how we have been handled. On the day the dissolution order request was announced, the entrance to the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology was sealed off. Did they genuinely believe that members of the Family Federation would launch an attack? This seems like nothing more than an unilateral attempt to manipulate public opinion. The 6th is the change in interpretation of laws and regulations that took place overnight. Up to that point, the government had consistently insisted that the grounds for requesting a dissolution order were criminal matters only and did not include civil offenses. However, under pressure from distorted information fueling public opinion and media narratives, as well as attacks from opposition parties, the interpretation was abruptly changed overnight. Just 4 days prior, a cabinet decision had affirmed the previous stance, yet this was overturned in a single night. Despite calls for an explanation, the government continues to refuse to disclose the details. The Family Federation has maintained its corporate status for 60 years and has never been convicted of criminal charges such as fraud or coercion. To cite examples from other religious corporations, there was an organization whose leaders caused the deaths of 7 people through group assaults under the pretext of repentance, as well as an organization with over 12 criminal offenses. Yet, the courts ultimately did not approve their dissolution. Furthermore, the civil cases that the government cites as grounds for dissolution were all resolved through settlement payments or mutual agreements and are already closed. Since 2009, our rigorous compliance efforts have significantly improved areas of deficiency within our organization, and there have been no new civil lawsuits related to donations since 2016. This is where the Family Federation stands today. So then what is the true intention behind this decision to request a dissolution order? Religious council members who questioned former Prime Minister Kishida's sudden reversal were persuaded with arguments such as, if we don't act, the government itself could collapse. This overnight reinterpretation seems to have destined the dissolution of the Family Federation an absolute and unchallengeable directive. 7th, Why is the Family Federation accused of being an anti-Japanese organization? I believe that none of our current members feel that our organization teaches anti-Japanese ideology. On the contrary, our founders, Reverend Sungmya Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, have always emphasized that those who cannot love their own country cannot love the world. While it is undeniable that we have faced unreasonable criticism due to being a religion originating in Korea, there was a report on November 28th and 29th in the United Nations Human Rights Committee in Geneva, Switzerland, stating that the abnormal attacks by the Japanese government on the Family Federation could amount to discrimination against minorities and religious minorities. Looking back at the 60 years of the Family Federation in Japan, I can confidently state on behalf of all members that we have fully embodied the vision of loving heaven, loving people, and loving the nation. The series of actions taken by the government this time means that the threshold for government intervention in religion has been significantly lowered. At this moment, I am deeply concerned that Japan's democracy is beginning to break down. The violation of freedom of religion and human rights signifies the collapse of universal human rights for all of humanity. Former European Commission Special Envoy for the Promotion of Freedom of Religion outside the EU, Jan Figel, stated, "Freedom of religion is the litmus test for all human rights. If this is not respected, freedoms of speech, assembly, and association will undoubtedly be restricted, suppressed, and violated." Today, I have spoken from the perspective of the Family Federation, which is facing many trials. However, I hope that you will understand that this issue is not limited to just one religious organization, but it is a challenge for all religions, and in fact, a matter that shakes the very foundation of democratic states. The Family Federation is fully committed to promoting reforms that adapt to the times, aiming to become an organization that contributes to the public good while ensuring the faith is passed on to future generations. We sincerely ask for your understanding and support in this endeavor. This afternoon, our members across the country have planned rallies and marches to deliver the truth to the people of Japan. If you happen to see them on the streets, we would be grateful for your words of encouragement. Thank you once again for inviting me today, and thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much, President Tanaka. At this point, we will read the declaration adopted at the Japan Committee for the ICRF General Assembly. Declaration. Today, freedom and democracy around the world are facing serious challenges from authoritarianism. Similarly, freedom of religion, a core principle of democracy, is under significant threat. We cannot overlook the situation where religious freedom is being undermined in authoritarian countries. As the Japan Committee for the International Coalition for Religious Freedom, we are deeply concerned about these issues from the standpoint of protecting human rights and promoting global peace. In Japan as well, we are seeing major issues related to religious freedom. Movements to restrict free religious activities can be seen within the government and media. This year, the U.S. State Department highlighted religious freedom in Japan as a serious issue in its annual International Religious Freedom Report, expressing clear concerns. In Europe also, a conference to report on and discuss the current situation of new religious movements was held in Bordeaux, France. and the Japanese government's request for the dissolution of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification was reported as a threat to religious freedom. If laws or regulations that undermine religious freedom are enacted in Japan, a country often seen as a model of freedom and democracy in Asia, it will raise serious doubts about Japan's democracy and human rights among Western and Asian countries. This could also lead to spiritual confusion and foster intolerant and hostile society. We must prevent Japan from losing the global respect it has earned. In response, the Japan Committee for the International Coalition for Religious Freedom declares the following. 1. Defining religion or cults through legislation should be avoided. 2. Freedom of religion must guarantee not only the freedom to believe, but also the freedom to engage in activities based on those beliefs. 3. The principle of separation of church and state prohibits government interference in religious activities. 4. Law restricting religious activities should not be enacted. 5. Violations of religious freedom undermine Japan's standing in the international community. We strongly hope that Japan, with its rich history of religion and culture, will continue to be a nation that cherishes freedom of religion, fundamental human rights, and the principles of freedom and democracy. December 8, 2024. Japan Committee for the International Coalition for Religious Freedom. If you agree with the declaration, please show your support with a round of applause. This concludes the program for today's event. We sincerely appreciate your participation. The live broadcast will now come to an end. Once again, thank you very much for your support.